The autumn morning was cool and crisp when Elara Vance walked through the metal doors of Riverside High School. She adjusted the clear plastic tube that ran from her nose, wrapping behind her ears and connecting to the small oxygen tank in her backpack. Her fingers moved up to touch her smooth scalp, where thick curls had once grown. 3 months of chemotherapy had taken her hair, but not her determination to return to school. She had fought hard to convince her parents that she needed normalcy, needed to be with her friends, needed to feel like a regular teenager again. Despite the cancer that was trying to steal her childhood, the hallway was crowded with students. Rushing to their lockers before first period, Elara kept her eyes forward, focusing on making it to her locker without incident. She had been back for 2 weeks now, and each day felt like walking through a minefield. The stairs were bad enough, but the whispers that followed her down the hallway cut deeper than any surgeon's knife. Some students moved away from her like cancer was contagious. Others looked at her with pity that made her stomach turn. But worst of all was the group of football players who had made her their special target, led by Brandon King, the star quarterback whose father owned half the businesses in town. Look who decided to show up again. Brandon's voice boomed across the hallway as Elara reached her locker. He was leaning against the wall with his Letterman jacket bright red against the beige paint. His girlfriend, Chloe Sterling, stood beside him, her cheerleader uniform perfect and her blonde hair shining under the fluorescent lights. I thought aliens weren't allowed in human schools. Elara's hands shook slightly as she worked the combination on her locker. 12, 24, 36, the same number she had used since freshman year, back when she was just another girl trying to survive high school. Back when her biggest worry was whether she would make the track team. Now she couldn't even run without gasping for air, couldn't climb stairs without resting halfway up, couldn't go anywhere without the oxygen tube that marked her as different, as sick, as less than human in the eyes of her tormentors. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Baldy," Brandon said louder, pushing off the wall and walking toward her. His football friends, Liam Olsen and Noah Grant, followed close behind, their heavy footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. Other students started to gather, some pulling out their phones to record whatever was about to happen. This had become the morning entertainment at Riverside High, watching Brandon and his crew torment the sick girl who dared to come back to school. Elara tried to ignore them, pulling her chemistry textbook from her locker and holding it against her chest like a shield. She just needed to make it to class. Mrs. Peterson's room was only 50 feet away. If she could just walk fast enough, maybe they would get bored and leave her alone. But as she turned to leave, Brandon stepped directly into her path. He was 6 feet tall and built like the athlete he was, using his size to block her completely. "Where do you think you're going, space girl?" he asked with a cruel smile. "Don't you want to hang out with us? We could use a mascot for the team. You already look like one of those hairless cats my mom is always showing me on Instagram." The crowd laughed, some nervously, some genuinely amused. Chloe held up her phone, making sure to capture every moment. "This is going to get so many views," she said excitedly. "People love watching weird stuff, and you're about as weird as it gets, cancer girl." Elara felt her chest tighten, and not from her medical condition. The humiliation burned through her like acid, eating away at the confidence she had tried to build up over the summer during treatment. Her mother had told her she was beautiful, that her bald head showed her strength, that the oxygen tube was a sign of her body fighting to live. Her father had said she was the bravest person he knew, braver than any soldier he had served with in the Navy SEALs. But standing here, surrounded by laughing teenagers who saw her as nothing more than entertainment, she felt small and alone and worthless. "Please, just let me go to class," Elara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "I haven't done anything to you." Brandon laughed harder. "You haven't done anything? You exist. That's enough. You make everyone uncomfortable with your disease and your ugly bald head and that disgusting tube in your nose. Why don't you just stay home where you belong? Better yet, why don't you just give up already? Save everyone the trouble of having to look at you." The words hit Ilara like physical blows. Give up. He was telling her to give up, to stop fighting, to let the cancer win. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough tears in hospital beds and chemotherapy chairs. She wouldn't give Brandon King the satisfaction of seeing her break. Leave her alone, Brandon. A new voice cut through the crowd. Jordan Wells pushed through the circle of students, his tall frame and basketball player build, giving him the confidence to stand up to the football team. Jordan had been Ilara's friend since elementary school, one of the few who hadn't abandoned her when she got sick. She's not hurting anyone. Just back off. Liam and Noah immediately moved to flank Jordan, ready to fight if necessary. The tension in the hallway ratcheted up several notches. Teachers should have been intervening by now, but Ilara noticed Coach Finley standing at the end of the hallway, watching everything and doing absolutely nothing. The football team was his pride and joy, and Brandon was his star player. He wouldn't risk the season by disciplining him over a little bullying. "Oh, look, the sick girl has a boyfriend," Chloe said in a sing-song voice. "How sweet. Are you going to kiss her, Jordan? Careful, you might catch her cancer." More laughter from the crowd. Ilara wanted to disappear, wanted to sink into the floor and never come back up. This was worse than the physical pain of chemotherapy, worse than the nausea and the exhaustion and the fear. This was social death by 1,000 cuts. Her dignity stripped away piece by piece in front of everyone she knew. Brandon reached out suddenly and grabbed Ilara's oxygen tube. "Let's see what happens when we disconnect the life support," he said with a grin. "Maybe you'll turn back into a normal person instead of this freak show." Panic shot through Ilara as Brandon yanked the tube from her nose. The plastic scraped against her nostrils, sending sharp pain through her sinuses. Without the supplemental oxygen, her chest immediately felt tight, her breathing becoming labored. The crowd gasped, some in shock, others in excitement. This was crossing a line, even for Brandon, but no one moved to stop him. Jordan lunged forward, but Liam and Noah grabbed him, slamming him back against the lockers with a metallic crash. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," Liam warned, holding Jordan in place, while Brandon continued his torment. Ilara reached for her oxygen tube, but Brandon held it high above her head, far out of her reach. Her vision started to blur around the edges as her body struggled without the extra oxygen it needed. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, could feel the familiar panic of not being able to breathe properly. This was dangerous, potentially life-threatening, but Brandon didn't care. To him, she wasn't a person. She was just a target, something to destroy for his own amusement. "What's wrong? Can't breathe," Brandon taunted, waving the tube like a trophy. "Maybe you should have thought about that before coming to our school looking like a freak. This is what happens when you don't know your place." The world started to spin for Ilara. Black spots danced in her vision as her oxygen-deprived brain struggled to function. She could hear Jordan shouting, could hear Chloe's cruel laughter, could hear the crowd murmuring with a mix of excitement and concern. But it all seemed very far away, like she was underwater and sinking deeper with each passing second. Her legs felt weak, her hands trembling as she tried one more time to reach for her lifeline. That's when she saw him through the glass doors at the end of the hallway, standing perfectly still in the parking lot. Her father, Marcus Bell, dressed in his black jacket and jeans, his face completely calm, but his eyes burning with a fury she had never seen before. He didn't move, didn't rush in to save her. He just watched, taking in every detail, memorizing every face, documenting everything in his mind with the precision of the Navy SEAL he had been for 15 years. Brandon finally dropped the oxygen tube on the floor, grinding it under his foot for good measure. "Oops," he said with fake innocence. "Looks like you'll have to crawl for it like the worm you are." Ilara dropped to her knees, not from submission, but from necessity. Her lungs burned as she grabbed the tube and pressed it back to her nose with shaking hands. The oxygen flowed again, sweet and life-giving, and gradually her vision cleared. She looked up to see Brandon and his friends walking away, high-fiving each other like they had just won a championship game. Chloe was already posting the video online, adding cruel captions and hashtags that would ensure maximum humiliation. Jordan finally broke free from Liam and Noah, rushing to Ilara's side to help her stand. "We need to report this," he said urgently. "This is assault, Ilara. They could have killed you." But Ilara was looking at the door where her father had been standing. He was gone now, vanished like he had never been there at all. But she knew he had seen everything, and she knew her father well enough to know that Brandon King and his friends had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought she was defenseless, thought she had no one to protect her, thought they could torment her without consequences. They had no idea that her father was Marcus Bell, a man who had spent 15 years hunting terrorists in the darkest corners of the world. A man who knew 1,000 ways to destroy an enemy without laying a finger on them. A man who loved his daughter more than life itself and would move heaven and earth to protect her. That evening, Ilara sat at the dinner table, pushing her mashed potatoes around her plate. The food tasted like cardboard in her mouth, which was a common side effect of chemotherapy. But tonight, it was more than that. The humiliation from school sat heavy in her stomach, making it impossible to eat. Her nose still hurt from where Brandon had yanked out the tube, and there was a small cut on her nostril that had bled for an hour after she got home. Her mother, Sarah Vance, watched her with concerned eyes. As a registered nurse, she could read the signs of distress in her daughter's body language, the way Ilara hunched her shoulders, the tremor in her hands, the shallow breathing that had nothing to do with her medical condition. "Baby, you need to eat something," Sarah said softly. "You have treatment tomorrow, and you need to keep your strength up." Marcus sat at the head of the table, his plate untouched. He hadn't said a word since Ilara came home, but his eyes hadn't left her face. She could feel the weight of his gaze, could sense the barely controlled rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. Her father had always been the quiet one, the one who observed and calculated before acting. It was what had made him such an effective SEAL and what made him terrifying when someone threatened his family. "What happened to your nose?" Marcus asked finally, his voice low and controlled. Each word was carefully measured, like he was afraid of what might happen if he let his emotions slip. Ilara touched the small bandage she had put over the cut. "It's nothing, Dad, just a nosebleed. They happen sometimes with the chemo. That's not a normal nosebleed," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. "Someone pulled your tube out. I want to know who." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Ilara could hear the clock ticking on the wall, could hear the refrigerator humming, could hear her own heart beating faster. She knew her father had seen what happened, but she also knew that if she confirmed it, there was no telling what he might do. Marcus Bell was not a man who forgave easily, and when it came to his daughter, he was capable of anything. "It was an accident," Ilara lied, not meeting his eyes. "I got bumped in the hallway, and the tube came loose." Marcus's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles working beneath his skin. His hands, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into fists. "An accident," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Someone accidentally grabbed your medical equipment and accidentally pulled it out and accidentally caused you to nearly pass out from lack of oxygen." Sarah placed a warning hand on her husband's arm. "Marcus, please, let's not make this worse." "Worse?" Marcus turned to look at his wife, and Ilara saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. "Our daughter is being tortured at school while she fights cancer, and you're worried about making it worse." "It can't get much worse, Sarah." His phone buzzed on the table. Marcus picked it up, and his expression darkened even further. "Jordan sent me something," he said quietly. Without another word, he pressed play on the video. The small speaker filled the kitchen with the sounds of that morning's torment. Chloe's cruel voice narrating the freak show, Brandon's laughter as he pulled out the oxygen tube, the crowd cheering them on, and through it all, Ilara's desperate gasps for air. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she watched her daughter being assaulted. Tears streamed down her face as she saw the fear in Ilara's eyes, the way she dropped to her knees, the casual cruelty of children who had forgotten how to be human. When the video ended, the kitchen was silent, except for Sarah's quiet sobs. Marcus set the phone down with careful precision. He stood up slowly, walking to the kitchen counter, where he kept a notepad and pen. When he turned back around, his face was completely calm, but Ilara recognized the look. It was the same expression he had when he talked about his missions, when he described hunting the most dangerous people in the world. It was the face of a predator who had identified his prey. "Names," he said simply, sitting back down with the notepad. "I want every name, every detail, everything you can remember." "Dad, please don't do anything crazy," Ilara pleaded. "It will only make things worse for me at school." Marcus looked at his daughter, and his expression softened slightly. "I'm not going to do anything crazy, baby girl. I'm going to do something precise, something strategic, something that ensures this never happens again." He picked up the pen, holding it like a weapon. "Now, names." Ilara sighed, knowing there was no point in fighting. "Brandon King, he's the football captain. His dad owns King Construction and half the commercial real estate in town. His girlfriend is Chloe Sterling. She's the head cheerleader. Liam Olsen and Noah Grant are his best friends. They're both on the football team too." Marcus wrote everything down in neat, precise handwriting. "And the adults? Which teachers saw this happening?" "Coach Finley was there," Ilara admitted quietly. "He saw everything and just walked away." Marcus's pen stopped moving for a moment, then continued. "Anyone else?" "Principal Davison knows about the bullying, but he won't do anything because Brandon's family donates a lot of money to the school. They funded the new football field and the weight room. Brandon is untouchable." "No one is untouchable," Marcus said quietly, and something in his voice made Ilara shiver. "Everyone has weaknesses. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has something they don't want the world to know." Over the next few hours, Marcus filled pages with notes. He had Ilara describe every incident, every cruel word, every moment of torment she had endured since returning to school. He documented times, dates, locations, witnesses. He treated it like a military intelligence report, gathering every piece of information that might be useful. Sarah tried several times to calm him down, to suggest they go through proper channels, but Marcus was beyond reasoning. When Ilara finally went to bed, exhausted from reliving her trauma, Marcus remained at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop and began researching Brandon King's family, their business interests, their connections, Chloe Sterling and her family's social media presence, Coach Finley's career history, Principal Davison's educational background and financial records. Every piece of public information was gathered, analyzed, catalogued. At midnight, Sarah found him still working. "Marcus, you need to sleep," she said softly, rubbing his shoulders. "This isn't healthy." Marcus looked up at his wife, and she saw the pain in his eyes. "They tried to suffocate our baby, Sarah. They ripped out her oxygen tube while she has stage 3 lymphoma. They filmed it for entertainment, and the adults who are supposed to protect her just watched." His voice cracked slightly. "I've protected this country from terrorists, but I can't protect my own daughter from high school bullies." Sarah wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his head. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered. "But you can't go to war with children, Marcus. They're just kids who are torturing our daughter," Marcus replied, his voice hard again. "Kids whose parents have taught them that power and money mean you can hurt anyone you want without consequences. Kids who need to learn that there are lines you don't cross." The next morning, Marcus was up before dawn. He dressed in his black jacket and jeans, the same outfit he wore for reconnaissance missions. He drove to Riverside High and parked across the street, watching as students arrived for school. He saw Brandon pull up in his expensive truck, laughing with his friends. He saw Chloe get out of her BMW, already filming something on her phone. He saw Coach Finley drinking coffee and joking with other teachers, not a care in the world. And he saw Ilara arrive with Jordan, the two of them walking close together for protection. His daughter looked small and fragile, the oxygen tube, a constant reminder of her vulnerability, but she held her head high, refusing to be broken by her tormentors. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with rage. His little girl was braver than any soldier he had ever served with, facing her enemies every day despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. "Thompson, it's Marcus." "Yeah, I need to call in that favor. Can you get the others together? We have a situation." He listened for a moment, then continued. "My daughter is being targeted at school. The system is failing her. I need backup. Thanks, brother. I knew I could count on you." Over the next few days, Marcus built his network. Fellow veterans who had children in the school system, parents who had watched their kids be bullied while the administration did nothing, teachers who were fed up with the corruption but afraid to speak out alone. Slowly, carefully, Marcus assembled an army of people who were ready to fight back against the system that protected bullies and punished victims. He also began documenting everything. He had Jordan and other students send him videos of every incident. He collected witness statements from students who had seen Brandon's behavior over the years. He found other victims who had been too afraid to come forward, kids who had transferred schools or dropped out entirely because of Brandon and his crew. The evidence mounted, painting a picture of systematic abuse that had been covered up by money and influence. But Marcus knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The King family had too much power, too many connections. To truly stop them, he would need to be strategic, to use their own arrogance against them. He would need to make them expose themselves, to let their cruelty be seen by everyone who had been looking the other way. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Friday was the homecoming game, the biggest event of the fall semester. The whole town would be there, including local media and college scouts. Brandon would be the star, the golden boy, leading his team to victory. It was the perfect stage for Marcus to execute his plan. That morning, Marcus visited Principal Davison's office. He didn't make an appointment, didn't announce himself. He simply appeared, using the skills he had learned in 15 years of covert operations. Davison looked up from his desk to find Marcus standing in his office, having somehow bypassed the secretary and security. "Mr. Bell," Davison stammered, clearly unnerved, "you can't just barge in here like this." Marcus placed a thick folder on the desk. "This contains evidence of assault, harassment, and civil rights violations occurring at your school. It also contains evidence of your failure to act, your acceptance of bribes from the King family, and your violation of federal education laws regarding students with disabilities." Davison's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. My daughter has cancer," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout could. "She requires oxygen to breathe. That makes her protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Every time Brandon King touches her oxygen tube, he's committing a federal crime. Every time you fail to stop him, you're an accomplice." The principal's hands shook as he opened the folder, seeing page after page of documentation, photos, videos, witness statements, financial records showing donations from the King family that coincided with Brandon's disciplinary issues being dismissed. It was damning, comprehensive, and undeniable. "What do you want?" Davison asked weakly. "Justice," Marcus replied simply. "But since you're incapable of providing that, I'll settle for your cooperation. Tonight at the homecoming game, you're going to ensure that several people are present, local reporters, school board members, and representatives from the state education department. You're going to make sure they have a clear view of everything that happens." "I can't control what happens at the game," Davison protested. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't need to control it. You just need to watch it. Brandon King is going to show everyone exactly who he is, and this time, there will be too many witnesses for you to cover it up." That evening, the stadium was packed for the homecoming game. The lights blazed bright against the dark sky, and the crowd was electric with excitement. Ilara sat in the bleachers with Jordan and several other friends, trying to enjoy a normal high school experience despite everything. She had begged her father not to do anything that would embarrass her, and he had promised to be subtle. But Marcus's definition of subtle was different from most people's. He had positioned veterans throughout the crowd, each one recording with their phones. He had ensured that reporters were present, tipped off that something newsworthy might happen. He had even arranged for several state education officials to attend, telling them he had concerns about ADA violations at the school. The game started normally enough. Brandon was in his element, throwing perfect passes and leading his team to an early lead. The crowd cheered his name, and Chloe led the cheerleaders in chants, celebrating their golden boy. But Marcus knew it wouldn't last. He had studied Brandon like he would study any enemy, learning his patterns, his triggers, his weaknesses, and he knew that Brandon couldn't resist an opportunity to hurt Elara, especially with a crowd watching. It happened at halftime. Elara needed to use the restroom, which meant walking past the area where the football team gathered. Brandon saw her coming and couldn't help himself. In front of hundreds of people, he stepped into her path and reached for her oxygen tube. "Still breathing, cancer girl," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Let's fix that." But this time, something different happened. As Brandon's hand moved toward the tube, Marcus appeared as if from nowhere. He didn't touch Brandon, didn't threaten him. He simply stood between his daughter and her attacker, his presence alone enough to make Brandon stumble backward. And in that moment of off-balance vulnerability, with cameras recording from every angle, Brandon's true nature was exposed for everyone to see. "Get out of my way," Brandon shouted, his face contorting with rage. "Do you know who I am? My father owns this town. I could destroy your whole family." The crowd had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Parents who had always thought Brandon was a nice boy saw the cruelty in his eyes. Teachers who had looked the other way saw the violence in his posture. The reporters captured every word, every expression, every moment of the golden boy revealing himself as a monster. But Marcus remained calm, his voice carrying clearly across the field. "I know exactly who you are, Brandon. You're a bully who targets sick children. You're a coward who needs his daddy's money to protect him. And you're about to learn that actions have consequences." That's when the state education officials stood up, having seen enough. One of them was already on the phone with law enforcement. The reporters were typing furiously on their phones, sending updates to their newsrooms. Parents were pulling their children closer, horrified by what they were witnessing. Brandon, realizing that something had gone very wrong, tried to salvage the situation. "He's threatening me," he shouted, pointing at Marcus. "This psycho is threatening a minor. Someone call the police." But it was too late. The police were already arriving, summoned by the education officials, and they weren't there for Marcus. They walked onto the field, their badges glinting under the stadium lights, and approached Brandon King. "Brandon King," one officer said formally, "you're under arrest for assault, harassment, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." The crowd gasped. Chloe dropped her pom-poms in shock. Coach Finley tried to intervene but was stopped by another officer who informed him he was also under investigation for failure to report abuse. Principal Davison, watching from his box seat, put his head in his hands, knowing his career was over. As Brandon was led away in handcuffs, his father rushed onto the field. Robert King was a powerful man, used to getting his way, used to his money solving any problem, but he found himself facing Marcus Bell, a man who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and couldn't be stopped when it came to protecting his daughter. "You've made a huge mistake," Robert King snarled. "I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you have." Marcus looked at him with the same calm he had maintained throughout everything. "Your son tried to suffocate my daughter while she fights cancer. He filmed it for entertainment. He tortured her for weeks while you taught him that money makes him untouchable." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow everyone could still hear. "I've hunted terrorists in caves in Afghanistan. I've faced down warlords in Somalia. Do you really think a small-town bully with a trust fund scares me?" The confrontation might have escalated, But Ilara's voice cut through the tension. "Dad, that's enough." Everyone turned to look at her. She stood at the edge of the field, her oxygen tube gleaming under the lights, her bald head held high. Jordan stood beside her, along with dozens of other students who had been victims of Brandon's cruelty over the years. They had all come forward, inspired by Ilara's courage and Marcus's refusal to let injustice stand. "Mr. King," Ilara said, her voice clear and strong, "your son didn't just hurt me, he hurt all of us. He made school a nightmare for anyone who was different, anyone who was weak, anyone he could target. But we're not weak anymore, we're not afraid anymore, and we're not going to be silent anymore." One by one, the students began to speak. They told their stories of abuse, of harassment, of a system that protected the powerful and abandoned the vulnerable. The reporters recorded everything, the truth finally coming to light after years of being buried under money and influence. By the end of the night, it wasn't just Brandon who was in trouble. The entire corrupt system that had enabled him was crumbling. In the weeks that followed, everything changed at Riverside High. Brandon was expelled and faced criminal charges. His father's business came under investigation for various financial crimes that were uncovered during the probe. Coach Finley was fired and banned from teaching. Principal Davison resigned in disgrace. The school board was reformed, with new members who actually cared about protecting students. But the biggest change was in the culture of the school itself. The students who had been silent learned to speak up. The bullies learned that actions have consequences. And everyone learned that sometimes it takes just one person standing up to change everything. Ilara continued her treatment, and her prognosis improved. The stress of constant bullying had been affecting her recovery, and without that burden, she was able to focus on healing. She still wore her oxygen tube, still had her bald head, but now she wore them with pride. They weren't signs of weakness anymore. They were symbols of survival, of strength, of a girl who faced both cancer and cruelty and refused to be broken by either. Marcus returned to his quiet life, but the legend of what he had done spread throughout the town. Parents who had once dismissed him as just another veteran now understood that he was something more. He was a protector, a guardian, a father who would move heaven and earth for his child. The other bullies at school took note, understanding that targeting vulnerable students might bring consequences they couldn't handle. One evening, months later, Ilara sat with her father on their back porch, watching the sunset. Her hair was starting to grow back, soft and fuzzy like peach fuzz. She still needed oxygen sometimes, but not as much as before. The cancer was in remission, and for the first time in over a year, the future looked bright. "Dad," she said quietly, "thank you for everything you did, for protecting me, for fighting for me, for showing everyone the truth." Marcus put his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "You don't need to thank me, baby girl. That's what fathers do. We protect our children no matter what it takes. But you did more than just protect me," Ilara continued. "You changed everything. You made the schools safe for everyone, not just me. You showed them that bullies can't hide behind money and power forever." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "You know what I learned in the SEALs? The most dangerous person isn't the one with the most weapons or the most money. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Brandon and his family thought you were weak because you were sick. They didn't understand that you're the strongest person I know. And they didn't understand that when someone threatens my daughter, I become the most dangerous person in the world." Ilara smiled, leaning against her father's shoulder. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Always and forever." As the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence. The battle was won, but the war against cruelty and injustice would continue. There would always be bullies, always be those who prey on the vulnerable. But there would also always be people like Marcus Bell, people who refuse to let evil win, people who stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. The title of their story would be remembered in Riverside for generations. Bullies target black girl with cancer, unaware her father is a Navy SEAL. It would become a cautionary tale, a reminder that you never know who you're messing with, that cruelty has consequences, and that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. But most importantly, it would be a story of love, of a father's devotion to his daughter, and of a girl who refused to let cancer or bullies define her life. Ilara would go on to graduate from Riverside High with honors. She would speak at assemblies about her experience, helping other students find the courage to stand up to bullying. She would become an advocate for cancer patients, using her story to inspire others facing similar battles. And through it all, she would remember the lesson her father taught her, that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about always getting back up. No matter how many times life tries to keep you down, Marcus would continue to watch over his daughter, ready to face any threat that came her way. But he would also become a mentor to other parents, teaching them how to protect their children within the law, how to document abuse, how to fight systems that protect the powerful. He would use his military skills not for violence, but for justice, proving that sometimes the best warriors are the ones who win without throwing a single punch. The story of the Navy SEAL father and his brave daughter would inspire changes not just at Riverside High, but at schools across the country. Laws would be strengthened to protect vulnerable students. Training would be implemented to help teachers recognize and stop bullying. And most importantly, a culture of silence would be replaced with one of courage, where students knew they could speak up and be heard. Years later, when Ilara had her own children, she would tell them this story. She would show them the videos, the news articles, the letters from other students who had been inspired by what happened. And she would teach them the same lesson her father had taught her, that everyone deserves dignity and respect, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to give up. The bullies who had targeted the black girl with cancer, unaware that her father was a Navy SEAL, learned a lesson they would never forget. They learned that actions have consequences, that cruelty leaves scars, and that there are some lines you simply don't cross. But more than that, they learned that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and a parent's love for their child can move mountains, change systems, and bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable. And in the end, that's what this story was really about. Not revenge or violence or even justice. It was about love. The love of a father for his daughter. The love that gives us strength to fight when we have nothing left. The love that makes us stand up to bullies even when we're afraid. The love that refuses to let cancer or cruelty or anything else steal our dignity and our hope. That love, demonstrated by Marcus Bell for his daughter Ilara, changed not just their lives but the lives of everyone around them, proving that sometimes love is the most powerful weapon of all.